Hey there. Here we are, another week of math. This week, at least for today, we are going to continue our discussion on multiplying fractions. We're actually going to finish the week by talking about dividing with fractions, and that will be our fractions unit. So last week we talked about multiplying regular fractions. When I say regular fractions, what I mean is a fraction that represents part of a whole number. So what I am talking about when I say regular is a fraction that is less than one whole. Today we're going to focus on multiplying irregular fractions. So what is a fraction that's considered irregular? An irregular fraction is something that's called an improper fraction or a mixed fraction. And then we're also going to talk about how do I multiply a fraction by a decimal and how do I multiply a fraction by a percent. And so we're going to talk about that as well. So what I need from you before we get started and before I get started on taking notes is I need you to grab your INB. I need you to open up to the next available right side page so that we can take some notes together. If for some reason you don't have your INB yet, you really should go get it from school. If you don't have your INB, grab a piece of paper and a pencil, preferably, so that you can take some notes. If you need to pause the video, now would be a great time to do it. Okay, what I would like you to do is I'd like you to go ahead and set up your page so it looks like mine. The title of our page is Multiplying Irregular Fractions, Improper. I put the word mixed in parentheses, comma, we're talking about multiplying by percentages, comma, and decimals. The first thing that we're going to do, though, is I'm going to define some important vocabulary words. And the reason why these are important is because I'm going to be using these words as I'm walking you through the process. So the first word that we're going to talk about is a mixed fraction. Some people call them mixed numbers, but we're going to talk about mixed fraction. So mixed fraction has a whole number and a fraction combined to represent a value. So for example, 1 and 1/2 would be a mixed fraction or a mixed number. Now, there has to be a whole number and a fraction put together to create one value. It's not an addition problem, but it's considered a number. Just like 10 has a value, okay? There are 10 years in a decade, or 7, the whole number 7 has a value. There are 7 days in a week. I could say, last night my family had pizza and we ate 1.5 pizzas. That's the value. That's the amount of pizza that we ate. We ate one whole pizza and then half of another pizza. So the value is 1.5. Okay, an improper fraction is when the numerator, that number on top, is bigger than the denominator. Okay, and an example of that would be 6/4. Okay, so an improper fraction is when that numerator, that number on the top, is bigger than the denominator, which is the number on the bottom. Remember, the denominator represents the number of parts in one whole. So, for example, if I were going to use this fraction, this improper fraction in a sentence, I might say, last night my family had 2 pizzas for dinner that were cut into 4 parts each. My family ate 6/4. Okay, and if you think about that, what does 6/4 look like it looks like one whole pizza and 2 more fourths of a second pizza. So it is 1.5 pizzas. Okay, so now that we have those, vocabulary words written down, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to multiply mixed fractions. Okay. I'm going to show you by doing an example of one, and then I'm going and walking you sort of through the steps. So our example problem is 1 1/2 times 2 1/3. Okay, so this is our math problem. So the very first thing that we need to do is, before we can multiply these, we need to turn the mixed fractions, and I'm going to put fraction/fractions, because you might come across a problem that's like 1/2 times 2 1/3, and there's only one mixed fraction in the problem. So you're going to turn the mixed fraction or fractions into improper fractions. So we're going to take these mixed fractions, these two mixed fractions, and we're going to turn them into improper fractions where the numerator is bigger than the denominator. And I'm going to show you how that works, okay? So I'm going to show you with 1 1/2. So how does that work? So what the very first thing that I need to tell you is that this denominator is going to stay the same. Okay, so the denominator stays the same. Okay. It's not going to change. In fact, I'm going to draw this arrow a lot closer to this second denominator, okay? Just like that. All right, so the denominator stays the same. There's no question about how many parts there are in one whole, okay? So now we have to find a new numerator. So how do we do that? What we're going to do is we're going to multiply, and I'm going to shorten some words now here. Multiply the whole number by the denominator. And in this case, what we're doing is we're taking 1 times 2, okay? So 1 times 2, 1 times 2, and that's this right here. Okay? 1 times 2. And I actually am going to need a little bit more space. So if you don't have enough space, so 1 times 2. Okay? Now, that equals 2. Okay? Then I need to add, so add the numerator to that product. Okay, so I'm gonna add this numerator to the product. So plus 1. And this is step 2. And this is 2. Like that. That's where the 1 comes from. Okay? So first I'm going to multiply that whole number by the denominator. Then I'm going to add the numerator to the product of the whole number times the denominator. So first I'm going to do 1 times 2 because that's the whole number is 1. The denominator is 2. So 1 times 2 is 2. Then I'm going to add the numerator to that, and that's going to give me 3. This is my new numerator. So now I have my improper fraction. Okay? So I'm going to do that really quickly with my other fractions. So I have 2 and 1/3. I'm going to do 2 times 3 equals 6 plus 1. So this is 2 times 3 plus 1 equals 7. My denominator stays the same. My new numerator is 7. So now I'm ready to multiply my new fractions together. 3 7/3. So now I'm ready to do my new multiplication problem. Now, this goes back to what I taught you last week. All I'm going to do is multiply straight across, okay? Now we're back to the kind of fraction that we multiplied last week. And we know that was really easy because all we do is multiply straight across the top and straight across the bottom. So 3 times 7 is 21. And 2 times 3 is 6. Now, when I'm done, my fraction is improper. So what I need to do is to turn my answer back into a mixed number, okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn, so I want to multiply I'm going to multiply the improper fractions. That's this right here. Okay, and then I'm going to return the mixed number, or return the answer to a mixed number. Okay, and then how do I do that? I have 21/6, and the way I do that is divide the numerator by the denominator. So I'm going to divide this numerator, divide the numerator by the denominator. Okay, so I'm going to do 21 divided by 6 equals 3. Okay, so 21 divided by 6 equals 3. Now, 6 times 3 is 18. That's not a full 21, so there's a remainder in this. So in order to figure out what the remainder is and how much my regular fraction is going to be, I need to figure out what the remainder is. So here's the deal. This denominator is 6. It's going to stay 6. Okay? In order to figure out what my remainder is going to be my numerator. I'm going to take 6 times 3 is 18, so I'm going to subtract 18. Okay, so this is 6 times 3. It's 18, and I'm going to figure out how many are left over. I'm just going to do that by simple subtraction problem. So 11 minus 8 is 3. So 3 is left over, and 3 is my new numerator. Okay? All right. So I think the biggest takeaway here in this particular situation is figuring out how to turn those mixed fractions into improper fractions, and then figuring out how to turn the improper fraction, the answer, back into a mixed number. But the multiplying part should be pretty easy, okay? Okay, and we're going to do some practice problems today. Okay, now I'm going to talk about, in this very last section here, I'm going to talk about multiplying with percents and decimals. Okay, so I want to remind you that the word percent means out of 100, okay? So when we're talking about out of 100 and we look at a percent, what that is really saying is that's the amount that is selected out of 100. And I want you to think of 100 as being a whole. So if I said I ate 30% of a pizza, I am telling you if 100 is the whole, if there's 100 parts to the pizza, I ate 30 of them. Okay? And so really what we're going to think about is we're going to think about turning that percentage into a fraction. And I'm going to kind of show you how that works. So our example problem for this is going to be 1/2 times 30%. Okay? So I'm going to focus on this 30% here first. Okay? 30% really means, my 30% really means out of 100. Okay? So 30% means 30 out of 100. So that looks like a fraction to me, doesn't it? So if I take 1/2 times 30 out of 100, I have a fraction times a fraction, and I can multiply straight across. Okay? So 1 times 30 is 30. 2 times 100 is 200. And now I have my answer, 32 hundredths. Now, I'm going to reduce that fraction because that's a big fraction. And I also can see that both of those numbers are big numbers, and both of those numbers end in a 0, which means they both have a factor of 10. It might not be the greatest common factor they have, but it is a common factor that is easy for me to divide with. So remember, when we are reducing a fraction, we use greatest common factor. In this case, I don't know if it's the greatest common factor, but I am using a factor that's easy. And what I do is when I find a common factor, I divide both the numerator and the denominator by that common factor. So I'm basically going to divide this and divide this number by 10. I'm going to divide this number by 10. And then I'm going to get a reduced fraction. So 30 divided by 10 is 3, and 200 divided by 10 is 20. Now, this is a much smaller fraction. If I wanted to see if they had any other common factors, if I wanted to see if I could reduce it even more, I might get out a piece of scratch paper and write down all of the common factors they have to see if I can reduce it. I'm looking at this fraction and I see the number 3, and the number 3, I cannot multiply 3 by anything to get to 20. So I'm guessing that this is in its most reduced form. Okay. Decimals are really similar to this whole concept. Decimals work in base 10. So if you go back to our place value chart in our I and B's, you can see that to the right of the decimal place, we have tenths, and then the very next decimal place is hundredths, okay? And then we have thousandths and 10,000ths, okay? We're going to just focus on those tenths and those hundredths, which are really similar to out of 10 or out of 100, okay? So I want you to remember that this is base 10, and that if you need to, we have that place value chart. So our example problem for decimals is going to be is going to be 1/3 times 20/100ths. Now, again, I'm going to keep the 1/3, and I'm going to think of 20/100ths as 20/100ths. So when I read this number 20/100ths and I read this fraction 20/100ths, they are equal. They mean the same thing. I use the same words to read those numbers. So look what I've done again. I have turned my decimal into a fraction. Up here, I turned my percent into a fraction. And now I'm ready to multiply straight across again. So 1 times 20 is 20. 3 times 100 is 300. And now I am noticing again, I know that I can divide both of these by 20 because I know when I count by 20s, I get to 100, and I 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So I know that I can divide 300. So I'm going to divide both of these, numerator and denominator, by 20. Remember, whatever I divide it by has to be a common factor. I can't choose two different numbers. It doesn't work. And that means I'm going to get 20 divided by 20 is 1, and 300 divided by 20 is 15. Okay? And 1/15 is my smallest reduced fraction. Okay. So I have some practice problems for you. What you're going to do is you're going to, if you need to pause on these notes to finish copying them down, I want you to take that moment right now, pause the video, finish copying your notes down. Okay, now what I want you to do is you're going to go onto your left side, or perhaps some of you are turning over a piece of paper and going onto the back. You have 4 practice problems to do today, just to practice these skills and using your notes on the right side to help you work through these problems before your assignment tomorrow. So our first problem today is 4 4/5 times 1 5/8. So here you're going to need to turn both of these mixed fractions into improper fractions. Over here we have 4/7 times 2 1/2. Here you're only going to have to turn this one into an improper fraction. This one you don't have to do anything to, and then you'll multiply. And then down here we have a percent. So 4/10 times 70%. Remember, percent means out of 100, so you can turn this into a fraction easily. And then over here we have 1 8/10 times 3/10. So think of 3/10. How would I write 3/10 as a fraction? And then here you'll have to turn this problem or this number into an improper fraction before you are ready to multiply. Make sure you practice reducing or turning your answers back into mixed fractions if they come out as being improper fractions. So practice that skill as well. There'll probably be at least 1 or 2 questions on the assignment tomorrow where I specifically ask you to make sure that your answer is in its most reduced form, or that you turn it back into a mixed number. All right, remember, if you have any questions for me at all on this process, any questions at all about multiplying irregular fractions, please pop into my office hour from 12 to 1, and I would be super happy to walk you through it. All right, we'll chat later.